highest rating based upon confidential surveys sent to other attorneys. Charles has been selected by the members of the State Bar of Georgia as one of Georgia Trend's 12th annual legal elite in 2 categories, business law and corporate law. He is an author of 2 books. And with that, I welcome him. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, what I wanted to talk, I appreciate that. What I wanted to talk to y'all about today was sort of recent developments in the entertainment industry in Savannah, and especially as it relates to economic growth. So, up until about 3 years ago, Georgia was already very successful in terms of bringing production dollars to the state, but they were 6th. They were behind California, New York, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida. Louisiana and Florida then severely curtailed their production incentives, and that immediately reduced the number of productions that were flowing into their states. Well, then North Carolina got hit with a double whammy. They not only curtailed their production incentives, they also passed the bathroom bill. And that bathroom bill did not sit well with many in the production community, and production in North Carolina has almost dried up completely at this point. So by the end of 2016, Georgia was now 3rd in the country, trailing only California and New York in terms of production dollars spent within the state. And at the rate they're gaining on New York, it's fully expected, possibly by the end of 2017, and definitely by the end of 2018, that Georgia will be second only to California. So the primary reason, of course, is Georgia's very generous through the state 30% tax credit that they offer to productions. And what that means is that a production comes in and they tell the state exactly how much they expect to spend within the state of Georgia. And the state film office gives them a letter stating that they will be entitled, based upon that spend within the state, to a 30% tax credit. They can then take that letter and they can sell those tax credits in advance and monetize those tax credits, obviously for a discount, typically about 85 cents on the dollar, but then they can use that money to actually fund the production of the movie. And so that's why so many productions are coming in. That's not available. That's the most generous anywhere in the country. Now, no one expects Savannah to surpass Atlanta, but here was the problem. Up through 2015, despite the fact that all of this money was flowing into Georgia, less than 1% of it was being spent in Savannah. Now, again, we're never going to surpass Atlanta, but there's no reason that Savannah can't be second in the state to Atlanta, and certainly have a lot more flowing here than 1% of the dollars spent in Georgia. So, this is where we are. The potential for Savannah as a destination for filming was not a secret to anybody. And this was back in 2011, what CETA did. Of course, y'all know CETA. They commissioned what they called a competitive positioning analysis and target industry study. And the purpose of that was to determine what industries offered the biggest growth potential in our area. Okay? Film and television was not only the #1 on the list of industries with growth potential, okay, but it was determined based on that study that if developed, that the entertainment industry and production could be right up there, even with the other 5 major pillars of the Savannah economy. That being the port, logistics, tourism, healthcare, and the military. The study found that if developed and done right, the entertainment industry could be on a level with those 5 pillars and become the 6th major pillar of the Savannah economy. So here's what CETA did. The first thing they did is they hired a gentleman named Ralph Singleton, who has many, more than 20, 30 years in the entertainment industry, lives in LA. They hired him to promote Savannah in Hollywood. And that's been very successful. He has all of these industry contacts. He's telling them about Savannah, and he's pushing them all here. The second thing they did, which was even more revolutionary, is they offered 2 local incentives that are not found anywhere else in the country. The first is they offer $2,000 in relocation expenses to any crew member with 5 years or more experience that would relocate to the Savannah community. Now, the reason that was important is because one of the major complaints of productions when they came here, there just simply wasn't enough crew available. So they wanted to try to solve that problem. But that only had a very minor difference. What made a huge difference, however, was the local rebate. And what they did is they offering a program where on top of the state 30% tax credit, any productions filming in Chatham County, once they prove the amount of money they spent in Chatham County, they then get a check for 10% of that figure on top of what the state is offering. So it's an additional 10% on top of the 30% from the state. Now that made a big difference. So what happened is, in 2015, as word of this was starting to circulate, this was going to become available, productions were already starting to look at Savannah. So if you look straight at the numbers, okay, up through in 2010, I'm going to back up a little bit, total production spending in Savannah for that year was $4 million. By 2014, it had gone up to $18 million. By the end of 2015, it had gone all the way up to $60 million. And that was the year before the local incentive actually started. 2016, the numbers are not available yet, but it is far in advance, or far in beyond the $60 billion of 2015. We know that. So that has that's had a tremendous effect. Now, that's just direct spend in Chatham County. Okay, so 2015, $60 million, which was more than every other year in the past put together. That was the direct spend that the production spent, you know, on crew, lodging, caterers, things like that. Now, there's also a tremendous indirect spend as the people here utilize all the local services and companies. You know, when a production comes to town, they need everything. They need, you know, everything a community does. These people, they come in, you know, they're here sometimes for 6 months at a time, like the TV show Underground. And so everything from, obviously, restaurants to barbers to dry cleaners to, you know, everything you can think of, insurance. No matter what industry you're in, there's probably some need that you may be able to fill. And so it was determined that the indirect spend was well over $140 million in 2015 in terms of the actual economic impact on the city. Now, there's an easy way, if you're interested in getting your business to out there, and your name out there to the entertainment industry, there's a very easy way to do it. Okay, anyone that believes that they may have some service they could provide to productions, you can register at savannahfilm.org. That's the Savannah Film Office's website. Or just, if you can't remember that, Google Savannah Film Office, and they have a directory of services where you can register. savannahfilm.org. But here is the key. If you're going to register, be aware that providing service to the entertainment industry is a little bit different. And what I mean is, let's say you're a dry cleaner, you own a dry cleaners. If they have a need for dry cleaning service, that may be at 4 a.m. on a Sunday, okay? And you have to make yourself available instantly whenever they need it, because they're on a very tight window and they have a very short window to complete all these things, but they absolutely will pay a premium for that added convenience. So again, go to filmsavannah.org and you can register there. So based upon what I'm telling you, it seems like Savannah's doing great and we're on the right path forward. But that's where we ran into some challenges. And there were 3 primary challenges that hit Savannah over the course of 2016 that was really threatening the continued growth of the entertainment industry, okay? The first is infrastructure. We had about 60 productions that came to Savannah in 2016 and filmed here in 2016. Savannah was filled to absolute capacity. There wasn't enough lodging for people to stay, there wasn't enough crew, they had to bring a lot of people in from out of town, and there was just simply not enough space. Now, what Savannah has is a ton of beautiful locations, but it does not have very much what they call sound stage or stage space, where productions can come in and actually build sets, okay? So that is proving to be a challenge that has to be met in terms of you've reached a point where you've completely, maximized all of the available resources. There's just you can't grow more because there's nowhere else right now to send them, the productions. So that was challenge 1, which I'm going to come back to. But challenge 2 and 3, 1 had to do with unions, okay? Now, every production that comes to town, they have to deal with 2 unions. One is the Screen Actors Guild. Now, the Screen Actors Guild, and that's for the talent, the actors and actresses. So the Screen Actors Guild is a little different, though, in that they have a nationwide national contract. So no matter where you film, you know what you're going to have to pay. It's based upon the amount of the budget of the film, the experience of the actor or actress, and so that's easy. There's very rarely any dispute with the Screen Actors Guild. The second union is IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. They represent all of the crew. So 90% of the people on your payroll are represented by IATSE, now, or also called the IA. Now, IATSE also has a national term minimum agreement, but the only signatories to it are the major studios. So unless you are Sony, Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount, whatever, you're not going to get the national term agreement. You're going to have to either negotiate an independent deal or sign what's called a single production deal. And a single production deal is approximately double the cost of the national term agreement. So I can give you a very simple example of that. Divorce Party was a movie that filmed there last year, one of my clients. They came and they had a budget of $750,000, but they had budgeted the national term agreement. They didn't realize they weren't entitled to that because they weren't a studio production. By the time they negotiated a contract with IATSE, their budget went all the way up to $1.1 million. It's an extra $350,000 they had to pay. And a lot of that was additional crew wages, benefits, retirement, that type of thing that they just did not budget for initially. So Savannah was getting a reputation as being, with productions, as you're going to get, beat up pretty good by the union if you go to Savannah. So that the ability to get the national term, you've got to understand, of the 60 productions that were here last year, only 4 qualified for the national term IATSE agreement. Underground, Baywatch, I can't remember it, but the SpongeBob, and then another big one. But other than that, everyone had to negotiate their own contract with the IA. So that was one problem. The other problem was, because it was the first year of that local incentive from CETA, it seemed to attract every single scam artist, con artist, person looking to game the system throughout the entire U.S. to Savannah. And because there was no mechanism in place for productions to get vetted and to, actually show that they were funded and were a legitimate production, a large percentage of the productions that left town in 2016 left town owing either crew or local vendors money. That is not a good situation to be in. So now you've got to bring in crew from out of town. They're like, why am I going to go to Savannah? I may not get paid. So you've got Savannah getting a bad reputation with productions and a bad reputation with crew. So something had to be done. And that's when, so those 2 issues got solved immediately. Okay, so what we did was what was described earlier. I went to IATSE and I found out that there are what they call national term signatories. And what that means is a private individual who's not an officer or even a member or whatever of the union will actually bestow upon them authority to offer productions the national term minimum agreement, okay? Now, you have to get vetted, you have to get checked out, you have to make sure that, you're not looking to, rip them off in some way. But went through that vetting process and got approved as a national term signatory. Now, as part of that, I can now offer any production that comes to town that national minimum agreement. Union problem solved. But the tricky part about that is now it's my responsibility to vet the productions and make certain that they are legitimate productions. So any production that comes to town that goes through Southern Gateway Production Services, they have to get fully vetted. And what that means is they have to provide me their budget, their script, their shooting schedule, and I have to have it reviewed by an industry expert. They have to agree to bring a co-producer on their staff for daily oversight to make certain, once their budget's approved, that they're following it. They have to take 2 weeks of crew wages and put it in an account managed by IOTC, and they have to take 2% of their total budget and put it in my escrow account so I can make sure all vendors are paid at the end. So as long as they're willing to go through that vetting process, they can then have access to the national term agreement, which will save them, if not tens of thousands, certainly hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it should be a win-win for everyone. Here's the thing, if a production comes to town and they say, yes, we understand we can save hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we don't want to because we don't want to be vetted and we don't want to have that additional oversight, well, guess what they've done? They've waved a giant red flag in front of both the film office and the union, and hopefully they will be run right on out of town, because that's going to be a clear indication that that's not a legitimate production. That's somebody here trying to take advantage of the city and our system. So hopefully those two issues, the crew not being paid, the non-legitimate productions, and the union issues, those have now been solved. So that leads to the last issue, what I'll leave you with today. And that is the problem with infrastructure. And there have been many different groups walking around trying to figure out what to do about this. And the one thing that most of these groups have in common is their plans involve building these giant production facilities in the 150 to all the way up to $750 million range, that essentially building the Emerald City, and there's just not, that they don't have the funding in place for it. It'd be great if it could be done, but it's unrealistic, at least at this point, until somebody comes in with the actual money. Then, not long ago, I got approached by a Georgia State representative that you may know, a gentleman named Craig Gordon. And what I'm telling you about now is not public knowledge yet. So it's not confidential. He doesn't mind telling people, but this has not been reported on in the paper, but it will be soon. So you're getting a little sneak peek. Craig is getting ready on March 2nd to make a proposal to City Council, that City Council deed to him or sell to him, he's willing to pay for it, about 15 acres of the Coastal Empire Fairgrounds, which is a total of 60. Now, as most of you know, the city, about several months ago, purchased the Coastal Empire Fairgrounds to not a small amount of controversy. And the plan at the time was to put affordable housing there. Now, no one actually knew exactly what that meant, whether they were talking about, Section 8 housing, small, inexpensive homes. I mean, nobody really knew, but the neighborhood association got together out there and said they didn't want that. They were concerned about the way it would affect the property values out there. There was already, that's actually not a real high crime neighborhood, but a lot of crime was attracted from the fair itself, and there's a lot of retired people, and they said, that's not what we want, and so the city kind of found itself in a bind. And so what Craig is going to propose is this. He wants them to sell him approximately a quarter of that land that encompasses all the existing buildings that are already there. And he's already got full funding to not only purchase the land, but also to completely renovate it. We've gone out there, I'm representing him as an attorney. We've gone out there with a production coordinator, construction coordinator, that went through all of the existing structures. They found that the big airplane hangar out there, the Quonset hut, that it's gigantic inside. There's all these beams, and they were worried that those beams may not be able to hold they need to be able to hold at least 500 pounds to be able to hold camera lights, things like that. So they did a big engineering study and found that those beams in there will hold up to 1,200 pounds. So the construction coordinator, and this was a guy who built all the sets for Hunger Games movies. I mean, he's a very experienced guy. We were meeting out there. He said, I can take that cattle palace and I can turn that into a shop. I can take that hangar and I can turn that into a stage. I can take the office space they have and I can make it production offices. I can, all the other existing buildings, I can make storage, wardrobe, I can, a prop house, everything, hair and makeup. He said, and I said, wow, that sounds amazing. I said, how long do you think it would take you to do all that? And he goes, well, I don't want to be unrealistic about it, but, you know, he goes, if I had my whole crew, you know, it would take at least 30 days. So, based upon that information, we went to several productions that were looking at Savannah and said, if this were available, and there's a plan with funding in place to also build initially 32 and then up to 64 production housing units. And let me explain why that is so important, okay? That's what got producers and movie people really excited. The thought of actually having housing for their out-of-town crew right there on the property. And here's why. Because even under the National Term Agreement, distant hires who they would be having to put up, they have to pay for their travel time, okay? And so you're talking about, it's door to door. So even if they have to put them up in a hotel, 15 minutes from the hotel and then 15 minutes back, that's an extra 30 minutes a day they're paying in travel time per crew member, which is, you know, it's not a lot, but you're talking about if you have 32 people, you're having to, and that's double time, by the way, that you have to pay for the travel. 32 people per day, you're looking at saving somewhere in the neighborhood of, by having it on site, about $21,000 per production. And then the savings you're going to have on a hotel, these production units there would be available for about $50 a night each, versus a hotel, which could be a lot more than that, easily saving $30,000 just by having production or production housing right there on site. And that's about the monthly rental of the studio. It's about $30,000 a month. So it's almost free to them to use the facility. So we've had a ton of productions that have signed commitment letters stating, you build this thing here, you make this available, we will come in. And one in particular said, we'll take every square foot for 6 months, and we will commit to it right now if the city approves it. One final thing. So that then obviously serves to as an anchor tenant for that space. The hope then would be you bring in bars, restaurants, you know, equipment rental facilities, other things that would, you know, support that type of endeavor in that studio project. Even, you know, I was talking to one of the council members and I said, like, what would be your dream business to have in that area? And she said, well, I would love to have a Trader Joe's. I said, but Trader Joe's is never going to come to that neighborhood. I said, well, wait a minute. What if I go to Trader Joe's and I say, I'm going to have 250 people every single day, 14 hours a day, with disposable income within walking distance to your deli. On top of that, my client will have an exclusive contract with a caterer to provide food service to that entire facility. And as part of that contract, we could make certain that all of the produce, meat, everything had to come from Trader Joe's. You now have the most profitable Trader Joe's in the entire country before you even open it to the public. So that type of structure and that type of project can bring really anything in because it supports so much and it helps all of the surrounding community. It really transforms that area of town. And here's the final part and the final piece of the puzzle that I'm most excited about, which is the city has had proposals from people already about putting a studio in, and the general response has been no, because we don't see a direct benefit to the African American community, which that neighborhood is primarily African American. And they said that, you know, that was the whole point of doing the low-cost housing, is that it directly benefits the African American community. So knowing that was important to them, I went to IATSE, which I'm now, as I told you about, the national term signatory, so obviously I have a good relationship with them, and I said, if the city is willing to sell this property to Mr. Gordon, Mr. Gordon's African American, 40 years old, grew up right around the corner from the fairgrounds, so you're talking about local ownership, which is a key. I said, would you be willing to come in and put in a classroom and start an apprenticeship program through Savannah State and Savannah Tech? Met with the universities, and everyone is on board. We're so excited. And so what they will do is they will start an apprenticeship program with those two schools that the graduates of that program, it'll be about a year long, will not only be guaranteed union membership, but also be guaranteed placement on the productions filming there. And they said they can guarantee a minimum of 100 new jobs every single year at a minimum starting salary of about $50,000. Anywhere between $50,000 and $80,000 with health insurance, retirement, everything. So you're talking about, if you start talking about low-cost housing, you're talking about treating a symptom, okay? You start talking about building, providing more than 100 new jobs a year to that community, now you're talking about actually effectuating a cure for the problem. And you start doing that, you start seeing the poverty rate go down, the crime rate go down. I don't see how anybody can possibly be against it. So we'll see. But again, it hasn't been publicly announced yet, but that will be hopefully on the agenda come up March 2nd, and we'll see if we can convince the city to sell that 15 acres. But we will keeping our fingers crossed. So that's where we are. Looks like if all that comes to pass, the sky is truly the limit, because now you've got the infrastructure, you've got the union relationship, you've got everything, the crew, everything in place. I'll leave you with just an example of what I'm talking about. There's a TV show on AMC called Preacher, and they came to town about 3 months ago, and they wanted to relocate from Albuquerque, and they had narrowed it down to either Savannah or New Orleans. Well, they ended up going to New Orleans, okay? There was not the stage space here available for them, and they did not have access to the term agreement. Now, flash forward. We're able to offer a production like that, the term agreement, the very minimum amount that they have to pay, the facilities there with housing, the local incentive through CETA as well as the state incentive, there would not have been even a contest for that production coming here. We will literally be able to pick and choose the productions we want to come to town at that point. So it'll be a great place for the city to be in. So anyway, I think that's the current state of the of the entertainment industry as far as economics go in Savannah. If there's any questions or anything.